Organizations across the Atlantic region, leadership and community members shared their concerns. Prosper says governance was a common issue.
A core feature of governance related to the recognition and respect for Mi'kmaq rights, and whether they be Aboriginal and treaty rights. And so a lot of things flow from that.
Prosper says Mi'kmaq policing and safety is also a concern. Since 2020, in separate incidences, several Indigenous people were fatally shot by police during wellness checks in Atlantic Canada.
Communities were quite consistent in terms of their need, expressing their need for communities to be safe. And there are a number of things that are happening as it currently exists within the negotiation of policing agreements.
According to the report, the second highest concern was health. Eskazoni Chief Leroy Denny said his First Nation needs a hospital within the community, citing systemic racism and racial profiling within healthcare.
The matter of racism and discrimination or discrimination being a systemic reality and circumstance for Mi'kmaq communities is something that was brought up on many occasions. It existed pretty well wherever we traveled.
Prosper acknowledges there are numerous reports on Indigenous issues, but says this one is unique.
Now is the time to move forward, to set an agenda, to allow all parliamentarians to know what the unique realities that exist, for the Mi'kmaq people. So it's essentially going to guide my work here in Ottawa.
Angel Moore, APTN National News, Jabuktuk, also known as Halifax.
We want to hear what you think about that story or any other you hear tonight. Here's how to continue the conversation. If you have a story you want to share, send us an email to news@aptn.ca. To read and watch our stories, go to aptnnews.ca. You can find us online on your favorite social media sites, including TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, and X. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. This summer saw 2 historic court cases take place in Manitoba. After the break, we hear from the judge who presided over them. Stay tuned. You've probably heard his name in our reporting over the years. Glenn Joyal has been the Chief Justice of Manitoba Court of King's Bench since 2011. This past summer, he presided over 2 court cases APTN followed closely. A trial that found serial killer Jeremy Skibicki guilty of 4 first-degree murders for Rebecca Contois, Morgan Harris, Mercedes Myron, and Buffalo Woman. And earlier this month, he acquitted Clarence Woodhouse for wrongful conviction of a murder from the 1970s. He sat down with T.R. Wheatley recently to talk about those recent trials, the calls to justice from MMIWG inquiry, judicial reconciliation, and the United Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, or UNDRIP.
Skibicki is such a unique situation in the sense that it really was, for so many people, emblematic of everything that the missing murdered women and girls inquiry was all about. So we really had a responsibility, I think, obviously to ensure that the accused in that case had a fair trial, but we also had a responsibility to ensure that deeply felt trauma by all the victims' families, but also the larger community, was properly addressed in a trial. There was present in the courtroom, certain things that I think were meaningful, not just for what it was representing in terms of the legal issues, but also for our court's efforts at judicial reconciliation.
You mentioned that the National Inquiry legal document. I want to speak to certain calls to justice and how you're trying to implement those here.
We have to be humble with respect to how much we can do in responding to some of those recommendations. The justice system obviously involves many actors, so we're not involved in the investigative role, we're not involved in the prosecutorial part of things. We simply adjudicate, we judge, we assess, whether it's a judge alone or with a jury. But to the extent that those cases come to us, I think we have a real responsibility to ensure that we handle them as quickly as we can, but also if we're not dealing with them in a way that's sufficiently, I think, sensitive, empathetic, and responsive to what are the unique challenges facing that type of investigation, that type of prosecutions.
The Woodhouse, his conviction, 50 years. Talk about that trial and the injustices.
Well, it's a tragedy. So when it happens because of bad identity, a lack of disclosure, the way the case might have been prosecuted, or the way the case might have been adjudicated and judged, that's not a good thing. Well, the same case involving, I think, Mr. Woodhouse's brother 2 years ago. Those are cases for which the system has a hard time offering an explanation. One of the ways we have to do that is when we see cases that can be identifiably called systemic discrimination, we have to call it out, and we have to address it, and we have to apologize for it.
What are some of the changes you've implemented generally, but also, in relation to Indigenous people?
So in every area where we've tried to make improvements, and they don't just relate to the Indigenous communities, but a lot of them do, we've tried to make things less costly, less complex, and more quick. One is child protection. The Family Division brought in some very important reforms that, in the context of these tragic apprehensions, sped up the process because it was happening for too long, is a situation where these kids who were apprehended were in limbo, sometimes for 24, 36 months. And bad things happen when children are apprehended and they remain in limbo. Phoenix Sinclair is a good example, right? Similarly, in the criminal law, we've tried to do that as well. Because as you know, unfortunately, it's more likely once an Indigenous person is arrested for that person to be denied bail. They don't get out. So the socioeconomic realities make it much more difficult for them to get out on bail pending a trial. 2017, where I struck a committee, it's called the Trust, Reconciliation, and Access to Justice Committee. So it's TRAC in short. This is a committee made up of about 7 or 8 judges and now 5 community members. Some significant participation by Indigenous community members. We're educating ourselves about Indigenous legal traditions, Indigenous legal orders, those things that I think are increasingly part of what it is Indigenous leaders and Indigenous communities want us to understand and in fact incorporate and integrate to the extent we can into our own processes. As well, the education is basically exposing ourselves to individuals who come and teach us and talk to us. Nagan Sinclair, for example, came and did a half morning on UNDRIP. Judges were very interested and very engaged. We're not doing enough sort of in community or on the land training yet, but we're planning that as well. The other two pieces are big systemic change and smaller systemic change. A good example of that is what we did 2 or 3 years ago when we brought in the Eagle Feather. Really meaningful, I think, step, but it wasn't done. The bigger systemic change involves ways that we might collaborate with or sometimes get out of the way of initiatives that are being brought by Indigenous communities in respect of ways they're assuming now what they believe is their own jurisdiction. And you're going to start seeing more and more of that, I think, in child protection. And you're going to start seeing the development of that as various courts, including the Supreme Court of Canada, address the extent to which Section 35 and the Indigenous right of self-determination plays out and evolves in a fashion that's going to require courts maybe to re-examine how we either work with, collaborate, or coexist with Indigenous justice systems and certainly Indigenous legal traditions.
Let's talk about UNDRIP. From your perspective.
Well, UNDRIP is a thing. It's now been adopted in a way in Canada where we as a judiciary have to deal with it and have to understand it and understand that it's going to have implications what it is we have to do when we're dealing with issues that touch Indigenous issues, whether it's a duty to consult case, whether it's a matter in the criminal realm, or whether it's a matter respecting a child welfare issue. All of that is now going to play out in ways that I think are going to be in some way connected to the broad principles and ideals of UNDRIP. So we have to deal with it.
Thank you, TR, for the highlights of that sit-down interview with Chief Justice Joyal. If you want to hear more from their conversation, the full sit-down interview can be found on APTN News YouTube channel. We're going to take one last break now, and we'll be back in just a few moments. Stick around. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. A beautiful orange sunset over Allison Bay near Fort Chipewyan, Alberta. Great picture shared by Sunny Piche. Send your autumn pictures to share@aptn.ca to be featured on APTN National News. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast.
Let's see what tomorrow has in store for us. It'll be 12 in St. John's and 14 in Charlottetown. Looks like rain for both. It'll be 7 in rain in Nain and 9 in rain in Cartwright. Rainy in Quebec. Quebec City will be 10 and 12 in Montreal with some sun. London will be sunny and 16 and sun and 15 in Toronto. Wawa will be 11 and it'll be 9 and some rain in Timmins. Churchill will be 2, 10 in Thompson. Saturday we'll see 16 in rain in Gimli and 13 in rain in Winnipeg. It will be sunny and 17 in Estevan, 12 and some cloud in Yorkton. Stony Rapids and Uranium City will be 7, 9 and lots of sun in Buffalo Narrows. Sunny in northern Alberta, let's see, it's 9 in High Level and it will be 10 in Fort McMurray. 14 in Edmonton and Calgary, 13 in Red Deer. Vancouver will be 16 and sunny and 21 in sun in Kamloops. It'll be 16 in Prince George and 11 in Fort Nelson. Whitehorse will be 10 and rainy and 0 in possible snow in Old Crow. Yellowknife will be 5 and 7 in Norman Wells. Sax Harbor will be 0, Colville Lake will be 4. Arviat will be -3 in snow and -2 in Cambridge Bay. Iqaluit will be 3 and -5 in Resolute.
APTN Investigates returns this week with an all-new episode. Investigative journalist Brittany Guillot looks into the mystery surrounding the death of Charles Odie. Odie's body was found wedged in a Vancouver storm drain in 2015. Authorities declared his death an accident, but his family has never stopped searching for answers. With more on this story, Brittany joins us now from our Winnipeg newsroom. Thanks so much for joining us, Brittany. What are the details surrounding Charles Odie's death?
Thanks for having me on. So Charles was a First Nations man living in Vancouver, BC at the time. One evening in September 2015, he and a group of his friends decided to go out for a night on the town. Over the course of that night, they visited several different establishments, and eventually the group ended up back at a friend's house. And around 4 in the morning, Charles was asked to leave the residence, and the details thereafter are disturbing. Charles was found upside down and headfirst wedged into a storm drain. His pants were sitting at thigh level. He was found with no socks or shoes on, and his personal items were scattered across the back alley where he was found. And so it's important to note that the storm drain that he was found in was approximately 4 feet in length, whereas Charles stood tall at about 6 feet. And so this is just one instance in which the Odie family says that the circumstances surrounding his death are suspicious.
Absolutely. And so what led to the closure of the investigation?
So the case was initially closed just a couple days after Charles's death. And so the Odie family wasn't happy with the progress of the investigation, so they filed a formal complaint with the police department. And shortly thereafter, the case was reopened as a homicide investigation and then closed again in 2017. So it's unclear why there was this back and forth of closing, reopening, closing, but Eugenia Odie filed a Freedom of Information request and shared that with APTN Investigates, and we get into the police investigation details in our episode.
Okay, and what has the response been like from authorities?
So far, the responses from the Vancouver Police Department and the BC Coroner's Service has been pretty tight-lipped, offering very little in the way of new information. And the Odie family has gone as far as to say that the treatment of Charles Odie's investigation has mirrored very similarly to what we've seen play out with missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And they are going to continue searching for answers, and they ask that if anybody has any new information regarding Charles Odie's death, to please come forward.
Okay, well, we'll need to end it there, Brittany, but thanks so much for the preview, and I'm looking forward to watching tomorrow. Thanks for having me on. You can catch APTN Investigates Echoes from the Drain airing this Saturday night on APTN. Well, that's all the time we have for your APTN National News tonight. Thanks for tuning in. If you're looking for more stories, please visit our website at aptnnews.ca. I'm Sav Jonza, and from all of us here at APTN, take care of each other and have a great Thanksgiving weekend.